Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to welcome you to the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership at Yeshiva University. And we're beginning the first in our three-part series for the 3 weeks entitled Trauma and Healing. And you will see a registration link for the other lectures and also a sign up for our WhatsApp group so that you can be on top of all the different events and programs we have. We have a late breaking edition, and that is that Yael Ziegler will be in conversation with Dr. Shira Weiss, Dr. Yael Ziegler and Dr. Shira Weiss on the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. Dr. Ziegler has written an incredible book on Eicha, on Lamentations, and she'll be joining us. Today, we have the distinct honor and pleasure I have of welcoming Rachel Sharansky Danziger, a friend and colleague. Rachel is a Jerusalem-based writer and educator. She lectures internationally at the intersection between Jewish texts and life in Israel and the art of storytelling. She's the co-editor of the recently published anthology Az Nashir, Women's Prayers for a Time of Need, and as well as Between Silence and Song, an anthology of women's prayers dedicated to Israel's days of national remembrance and celebration. I have a copy right here to recommend. Rachel is currently working on a book on Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, about lessons for social cohesion. We got to know each other these past 3 years through the Sefaria Word by Word writing circle. Rachel, how special it is to have you here. Thank you so much.
It's wonderful, wonderful to be here. Always fun talking to you, Erica, and I'm happy to share the conversation more broadly.
Okay. So here we are. It's hard to believe that tomorrow will be 650 days since October 7th. And Rachel, you've been a voice throughout, a voice in the times of Israel, a speaking voice, a writing voice, and a voice of poetry. Robert Frost once wrote, "Poetry is when an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found words." Tell us a little bit about the role that poetry and language plays in your world, and maybe specifically after October 7th.
Everything is specifically after October 7th, isn't it? I feel like sometimes I can't quite recall what life was before that, to be honest. I think language always, and now especially, helped me personally do two things. First of all, take things that are raw and too big and experiences that are complex and just are just a lot, and make them into something with dimensions, with texture, with heft, something I can hold in my hands and look at, and then either take something from or move past or share. And that's the second thing, it's connection. Language allows us to connect and to take what is a personal experience and turn it into the basis of a relationship building, community building, meaning building, because meaning is not something that we do on our own. Meaning has to exist in the space we share. And both these things, the ability to process what's happening to us and the ability not to be alone in it, have been so important and so crucial since October 7th. They're always crucial, right? Connection and life. But being able to take all these experiences and work my way through them instead of drowning in them, and then turning that into something that I can deepen my relationship with the world through, with people around me through, instead of something that isolates me in distress, was a huge gift. And poetry in particular has a special part in that, because poetry, of all the forms of communications, allows us to retain some of the fluidity and complexity of real experiences, even as we put them to language, even as we make them into something we can look at and handle and deal with. It allows us to keep the contradictory aspects of reality that seem as if they don't belong together, but actually do. And in that regard, poetry allows us to be honest about how complicated and deep and big the things we're experiencing now are: loss and pain and hope and fear and uncertainty, while at the same time moving past them or doing something with them or connecting over them.
Mm. You know, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I have a collection of poetry written after and about World War I. So, we think about love poetry and capturing, experiences of romance and affection in poetry. And so often poetry is used actually to really give language to grief. And I know, I imagine, because I felt this reading a lot of your work, oh, that's what I would have said had I had words for it. And so I thank you for that. And I'm wondering if there have been moments where you said, I don't have words. I'm at a loss for words. I don't have a way to articulate this.
I don't think that I had moments where I really felt as if I didn't have words, but there were moments when I chose to let go of words. And it was the moments of standing in the presence of grief. We lost a very dear friend, Rav Avi Goldberg, and I'm close friends with his wife, Rachel. She doesn't like to be called a widow. And when Rav Avi fell in battle in Lebanon, 2 days after Simchat Torah of 2024, a year into the war, for that day, I spent a lot of time with Rachel, and it was like being in the presence of the abyss. And I could find words to paper over it, to make it into something I can live with, but I didn't want to because I felt like it would be dishonest. I feel like sometimes the biggest homage we can pay to reality is to acknowledge when something is too big for words. Another aspect of silence specifically, and I know we're here to talk about words, but words only exist when there is silence, like light only exists when there is dark. Another aspect of silence is that silence allows us to come together in a way that sometimes, it's ironic. I said language is the thing that creates connection, but sometimes language can become a buffer because if we talk about the hostage deal, if we talk about the day after in Gaza, if we talk about, any of the many questions that are at the heart of very fervent disputes right now, the words we say pitch us against each other. And sometimes silence allows us to come together to a place of shared grief and shared hope. And that's something I've been working on a lot, on creating and participating in spaces where the community building happens, not through what we say, but through our choice to set apart our own words and allow something deeper to happen between us.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much because I think of all the pundits who get the space, who rush to hear what the politicians have to say and what the analysts have to say, and not what the poets have to say. And yet it's the poets, I think, who are going to own the day. I think about what we do on Tisha B'Av, right? We sit on the floor and we read Kinot. We read these very, very complex acrostic poems that cull from so many different biblical and rabbinic sources, and they're hard to learn and they're hard to understand, but they're thousands of years old sometimes, right? Or hundreds of years old, and they outlive all the prognostications of the time before. So as you're thinking about language in these 3 weeks, I have a friend who said he'd take 5 weeks in the winter instead of 3 weeks in the summer, because it's hard. It's sort of the time when we let go of, we go on vacation, we let go of the difficulties of the year or the routines of the year. Yet we have this 3 week sort of very dense period where we're supposed to have some of that silence of grieving and supposed to read the poetry of mourning, and it's like sediment, right? It's layers upon layers of, there's a York massacre, and then there's a Talmudic, matter, and then there's, certain pogroms, and they're captured in this sort of this acrostic of grief. How does the 3 weeks look different for you since October 7th?
I think that to answer this question, I actually have to go to the Tisha B'Av before October 7th. The Tisha B'Av before October
That was
7th.
very hard.
It was a very hard Tisha B'Av. That was at the heart of the protest and counter-protest over the judicial reform. It was a day when the reality of sinat chinam was of baseless hatred, what we say, destroy the Second Temple, was present in a way that made it feel as if the temple is breaking around us right now. And I remember sitting on my couch holding my then 6-year-old son, and I taught him the song En li eretz acheret, I have no other land.
Mm.
And it was a declaration of fidelity for me, of I'm still committed, but from a place of despair, not from a place of hope. And then I called my mother, Avital Sharansky, and I told her I've never felt so low. I never felt so desperate. I really think that maybe the state of Israel is going to collapse. That maybe this, you know, Atchalta de Geula, the beginning of redemption, as we call it in religious Zionist circles, was a false start. And she said, why are you talking in these absolute terms? You know, redemption or destruction. Look at our history. We had destructions and they were followed by rebuilding. You have to look, you have to take a step back, zoom out, and look at the broader perspective. Not every failure, not even every destruction is the end of a story. It may feel like an end of a story, but it's not. Now, I carried that perspective with me into the horrors of October 7th, into the shattering of everything we knew, into the feeling that the ground under our feet disappeared all of a sudden and we're walking on an abyss and we don't know who we are and where we are. And I carried these words with me. I couldn't quite live up to them, but I carried them almost like a talisman. And when I think about the 3 weeks now, it's almost like I keep meandering on a path between two poles. One pole is my mother's faith that she bequeathed me, that sense of perspective and of history. And, you know, reading all these keynote, as you said, all these lamentations throughout history. It's like, you see, we were low then, and we were low then, and we're low then, and yet we revived and we kept going time and time again, and that gives me strength. But I also keep going to the other pole of understanding in a way I don't think I could understand before October 7th, what it is to be broken, what it is to have your walls breached, what it is to have your faith, not in God, in the way things are, shaken. And I think that this fragility, this awareness of vulnerability makes it easier to mourn, because I know what it is to lose what you thought is, forgive the wrong word in English, but unlosable. Mm-hmm. And it gives me empathy to our forefathers and empathy to ourselves, honestly.
Yeah, it's so striking, Rachel, when you think of the image of breaching a wall and then thinking about the images that we're carrying that are very, very hard to shake of, of walls being breached, security walls being breached on October 7th, and, cars driving in and motorcycles driving in and then driving back and taking hostages. And I mean, it is important to contextualize this. We're not the first Jews to feel these feelings. Um, Sadly, we probably won't be the last. And yet we have this history. And how does history tell us we've overcome it? Or does history keep reinforcing the fact that we're going to be here again? So what tools do you have in your toolbox in which to mend it? Is poetry a tool for you in that way?
Yeah, I would say yes. I am not a poet, actually, in my mind. I mean, some people argued with that before, but I don't write primarily poetry. I write prose, but I write prose that is like poetry, and that I don't try to argue or posit or claim. I try to open doors. I try to express the complexity and express the things that are ambiguous and the thing and the opposite at the same time. And like I said in the beginning, poetry allows us to hold two opposing poles at the same time. And I can basically say, I feel weak and I feel strong at the same sentence when I write poetry, or when I read poetry, or when I recite poetry, or when I share poetry, because it's not just saying the words, I am weak and I am strong, or I remember redemptions, or I remember destructions. I find a way to weave it together and find words that hold both this at the same time. And that helps me acknowledge that we are all holding opposites right now. We are holding both at the same time, and we don't need to choose. In order to be strong, we don't need to forget our fragility. In fact, that's a good way to set ourselves on the way to being broken again later. But we also, in order to mourn and really acknowledge the loss and the fear and the hostages, the ongoing costs and the ongoing horror, doesn't require us to forget our successes or our strength. We can hold both at the same time. And sometimes when you speak the language of dispute or politics, it sounds as if you have to choose. We hear all the time, how can you be happy when the hostages are in Gaza? Or why are you making yourself sad all the time? It's not good for the resilience of the nation. Poetry invites us to consider that you can really do both at once. And not only is it okay, it makes us more than just choosing, I think.
I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you were saying, I write prose in the language of poetry. You write fiction, and right now you're working on a nonfiction. You're working on a commentary on the Book of Judges, which is something I think about the stories in the Book of Judges all the time now. The violence, the leadership, and and complex leaders, and powerful authoritarian figures. I think there's a lot of resonances. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and why it's important to you?
So I would say that, I mean, as you know, Erica, since I've been working with you on this book through the fellowship you had, the word with Sarah Walkenfeld, the Word by Word Fellowship, I started this book before the war, and it was going to be a commentary on the Book of Judges that will show how the family stories in the Book of Judges hold the keys to understanding what's happening on the geopolitical stage. And then the war started, and the present required so much presence for me, forgive my pun. There were needs around me that needed answering, and I could answer as a teacher, as a writer, as a mother, as a wife, as a sister. My brother-in-law has been in the reserves duty for hundreds and hundreds of days, as an aunt, as a daughter. Writing a commentary on a biblical book was just not
It
not
felt
something.
it felt like a luxury, eh?
It's not, it just felt irrelevant. It felt like something that belonged to a different life of a different woman. And then a year and a half into the war, oh my God, I can't believe we have a year where I just believe it sometimes. I realized that really the heart of the book is not about commentary, it's about how do we heal a broken society.
Mm.
And this is a question that is so relevant for us. And so much of the work I do as a speaker and a teacher has to do with trying to help us reweave the social fabric here in Israel, within the Jewish people as a whole. And suddenly it added urgency to this project because I said I can turn to Tanakh, to the Hebrew Bible, not as a luxury of something joyous to learn because it's fun to learn. I loved learning Torah. That's pleasure. But it's more than that. I have a duty, in a sense, to write it because that book that depicts the destruction of a society, the unraveling of all social bones, holds the hints how not to allow your society to unravel. So I'm hoping in this book to draw lessons from the Book of Judges that will, God willing, help us as we face our own quest for, I don't like calling it unity because the word unity implies uniformity, even if that's not what we mean, but togetherness, connection, God willing.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to reading it. You mentioned that you approached the war from all these different lenses. 5 days after the war broke out on October 7th, you wrote, I believe it was your first column about the war called Forever Choosing Life. And you opened by questioning the narrative of Israel's safety, saying, that we're all Adam. We're exiled, I'll read your words, we're exiled from the Eden of our previous self-perception. It turns out that Israel is not a done deal, but an ongoing struggle. And like Adam before us, we must find the strength to start again in the new reality before us. And you write with worn out tools, as Kipling wrote in his famous poem, If. I guess none of us could have imagined 649 days after October 7th that we'd still be in this struggle. And if we were Adam then, when it started, who are we now, if you could compare it to a biblical figure?
So I keep coming back to two images, so I can't choose between them. You'll have to take both. Sorry.
Okay.
One is Jonah. I keep thinking about Jonah, and I keep thinking that we are Jonah because we all had a Tarshish we were aiming for as individuals, as a society, as people. We had whatever Tarshish of our choice that we were pursuing. That's where we thought we're going to end up. And here we are in Nineveh. It's not where we wanted to be. It wasn't a fish in a storm that brought us here, but it was a storm. It was a shaking of the foundations of the world. And now the question is, what do we do with it? Do we, do what we have to do, but hate every minute of it? Reject the lessons it can offer us at the same time that we do what it requires of us? Or do we embrace it? Do we say there's a lesson to learn here? For Jonah, maybe it was a lesson in empathy, a lesson in letting go of truth and judgment. For us, maybe it's different lessons. But when God changes your course in this dramatic way across the board for a whole people, there must be something we're supposed to learn. And I keep thinking, I want to be a better variation of Jonah. I don't want to just, do the motions like he does when he walks through Nineveh and says in 40 days Nineveh will be destroyed because God forces him. I want to embrace whatever the lessons that are present here for me are and do something with them and grow things instead of waiting for God to grow a tree for me. So that's one image. And the other image I keep coming back to.
We just stay with Jonah for a second because I spent a lot of time with him myself, and I think a lot about the image of, you know, him as an individual who skirts the boundaries of a community, right? He's in a boat with sailors, experiencing the same crisis as sailors, but not participating in any way. He goes to Nineveh and he's on the sidelines of history, and he wants a tree to protect him. And God rightly, ends this book with the question, as you care about your own existence, but what should I do with all of these created things, right? Animals and people. And the tree that flourishes and then desiccates so quickly. Um, how do you think individuals can cope with being part of a collective? And I ask that really from a diaspora standpoint. And I was,
Mhm.
we who are with you, but not actually, you're an ocean away right now. Right? So I feel like I'm with you, but I know that there's an ocean there. And the storm is on the ocean, and I'm not participating. So I'm wondering what advice you might give based on that story to diaspora jury.
I want to first offer a slightly different perspective and then respond to your question, in a good,
In a chavruta.
Havruta sort of way. Exactly. Um, you're undergoing your own storm now as well that I'm not part of. Don't belittle your own challenges. We're fighting a war that's a physical war, and that takes physical. The cost of it is lives, and I'm not trying to diminish that, chas v'chalila. But you in America and in the free world generally are facing also an earthquake of sorts, a shifting of alliances, a sense of isolation, a rise of all kinds of voices that I don't think we could imagine 20 years ago rising in this way. I think Jews everywhere are experiencing a storm right now. The storm is different, but it's at the core a storm. So I could ask the same question. How do I feel, or how do I experience the storm that you're experiencing on the forefront, on your shoreline right now? And I want to go back to my parents for a second to address that before I go back to Jonah. Growing up, asked my mother many times and my father many times, what gave you the strength? My father and mother were separated for 12 years when she was in Israel and he was in the Soviet Union, and 9 out of those 12 years he was in the Gulag, and there was no guarantee that he'll come out alive and that they'll ever be reunited and have children. I was born after, and my sister as well. And I often ask them as an adult, more as an adult than as a child, what gave you the strength? What gave you the hope? And my mother repeatedly told me, and I think until October 7th, I didn't really understand what she meant, that what gave her strength was feeling that she's part of something much, much bigger than herself, that she's a soldier in a war or in an army. And when you're a soldier, you don't think, how should the general, I mean, maybe you think it, but it doesn't pay to think, how should the general manage the war on this front, on this front, on this front? Your job as a soldier is to think, how do I protect my position? How do I defend this little plot of land? How do I attack the next line? She said, so this was her life. Every morning she got up and said, what do I do now? What's the next thing to do? What's the next battle to fight? And she felt empowered by knowing that there are Jews all over the world asking themselves the same question. And obviously their answers would be different. You know, the Jews in Chicago and Paris and New York and Washington and London, everywhere, asking themselves what they can do, gave different answers than her. And my father in his cell gave different answers than her. And his comrades in arms in Moscow gave different answers than her. But that's fine because every person needs to answer for their position. So when I think about what we as a people, as a nation are undergoing right now, I don't think of it as what's more important or what's a more, where are you suffering more or where is more challenge. I'm asking myself, each of us is focused on, as long as we're all focused on fighting our own, protecting, defending our own lines, then we're all part of the same living, breathing community. And I think that's the thing Jonah wasn't privileged enough to experience. And I feel sorry for him.
True. The sense of being something part of something larger. And I really appreciate the granularity of what you've described, where, there's some larger plan, whether you believe that theologically or whether you believe that just as part of the human community. And what do I have to do today? Because I think that a lot of us, and I'll say I've had so many wordless moments myself where you become so overwhelmed by the hate and so overwhelmed by the violence and the world betraying us, and all those feelings that you think there's complete paralysis. There's sort of nothing I can do, and I think that's a very hard feeling. You mentioned Yonah, and you said that you have one other biblical figure.
It's not a figure, it's a whole generation. I keep thinking about the first generation that left Egypt,
Mm.
specifically after the sin of the scouts or the spies, when they were told that they're going to die in the desert and their children are going to make it to the promised land. And this entire generation had to get up every morning and keep going and keep raising children who will feel integrated enough into the great story of the Exodus and into the covenant with God that when Moshe will talk to them, the children, on the eve of their entrance to Israel and tell them, you stood in Horeb, remember you came out of Egypt, it'll make sense to them because it'll be their identity. So the generation that left Egypt had a job to do. They had to raise the kids that would carry the torch all the way through to the promised land. And that takes courage when you know that your own fate isn't going to lead you to get to that place that you dreamed of under the vine, under the fig tree. That the story you had in your mind of where you're going is lost. And I keep thinking about that because my understanding, I should speak for myself, my understanding of where we are in history and what generation we belong to and what's our job now, totally chucked out by October 7th. I really thought that we're kind of done. Like there's like a few pesky problems, the conflict, judicial reform, not judicial reform, but I really thought this was it. It's just little things. And now I'm like, oh no, we're still
It's an
figuring
existential, yeah. It's
it
an
out.
it's a much deeper existential crisis. I'm really glad that you brought in your mother in that same column, forever choosing life. You wrote that when you understood what was going on October 7th, which is very limited understanding because none of us really understood. And it's one of those questions, people ask, where were you on 9/11? And, now it's like, where were you on October 7th? And thinking, I want you to take us into that moment. I was in synagogue and a woman came in and she kept pointing at the word Yisrael in the Siddur. We're in the middle of Hallel, and it's Joy's moment, and she had this terrible look on her face of despair and urgency, and she kept pressing. And finally, I just interrupted my own Hallel. I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "Israel's at war," because her son was serving in the army. And so all of a sudden, and then there were these messages. It was like 10 people were kidnapped, and then 30 people, and 30 people was just so many people. I mean, who could have imagined? And you wrote to your mom, "We're safe, don't worry, please be strong." And I found it so ironic that you were writing to Avital Sharansky and you were telling Avital Sharansky to be strong. And then I thought, well, maybe the next generation has to give us that message and keep giving that message. She was the one who made me strong when I was a teenager. So when you think about being with your parents during this war, just take us into that moment and then take us into the aftermath of that moment, going through it, it feels like it just, like you said, it doesn't end.
It's hard to go back to that moment. It's hard because it's kind of, you don't want to go back to that moment. For me, October 7th started late. It started at 8:30. I don't remember exactly when the first sirens went there in Jerusalem. I had no idea. In 6:29 in the morning when the border was breached, I was asleep. And all my electronic devices were off. I had no idea. And it was so not in my horizon, not in my, mind in any way, that when we heard the siren, I told my younger kids, my husband and my elder son already left for shul earlier, it must be a mistake. Somebody pressed a button somewhere that they shouldn't have, but let's go down to the bomb shelter in the basement so that if there's ever a real siren, you'll know what to do. And I opened the door and I saw my neighbors who don't keep Shabbat running down the stairs like the hounds of hell are at their heels. And I'm like, never mind, let's go. And within the 20 minutes that passed from that moment until there was a break in the sirens and I could go up for the first time, the whole world came undone. Because in the bomb shelter, there are rumors, there are people sharing things. On the way up, I saw one of my neighbors screaming in the hallway that there are people wounded in a kibbutz and the army can't get to them. Now, we know now that this was the least of what happened, but it sounded unimaginable. It sounded impossible. And yet I started crying right away into my hands because I thought, if even a small percentage of that is true, it's the worst thing that ever happened to us in my lifetime, at any rate. And the thing that snapped me out of this state of total mental breakdown was that I started crying into my hands, and then I could suddenly see through my fingers that my daughter is staring at me and her face is shock wide and her eyes are huge, and I realized that I'm scaring her. And that was a moment of snapping and out of it, of saying, I have exactly one job today. I can't do anything about any of this. I don't know what's true and I can't do anything about it. I have one job, which is to get my kids through this day safe and as untraumatized as possible, as strong as possible. And I can't do that if I lose it. And that was a moment that I started projecting strength and projecting calm and managing the situation. And I think I felt very close to my parents at that moment because that was a moment of being a parent. This was a moment where being a parent meant everything. It really meant everything. And I knew that if my kids were not with me right there, right then for me to hold, I would be frantic. That them being there gave me the strength to do what I need to do, but also gave me solace. And I thought, my mother doesn't have her daughter with her right now. She doesn't know where I am. And that's why I sent that message, even though it was Shabbat and I don't regret it. Like, it was not pikuach nefesh, but it felt like the right thing to do. I have to say that you know, I said, be strong. What does it mean to tell your parent to be strong? It means you're telling yourself to be strong. It means you're telling your parents, I'm strong enough to tell you to be strong, so I'm okay. So don't worry about me. But I'm also telling myself, I have to be what I'm telling them. Like I have to rise up in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned, being a daughter and touched on being a parent. Now, all these hundreds of days into the war, how do you parent outside of pessimism? How do you give you're old enough to have perspective. Your parents are certainly old enough to have perspective and have experiencings, but children don't children have lives of immediacy.
I have to tell you, Erica, I think the kids are doing much better than us.
Thank God.
Some kids are scared. I'm not trying to belittle that. And in the beginning of the war, my kids were scared too. And I think one of the most heartbreaking personal moments, there were awful, heartbreaking moments beyond the immediate sphere. But early in the war, I should retrace my steps for a moment. After we opened the door and saw our neighbors running down and said, okay, 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 let's go, let's go, let's go. My kids ran ahead, and I suddenly realized that one of my neighbors, an elderly man, is bedridden. So, in a snap decision, I went to their apartment instead of going all the way down to the basement, and I helped pull his bed away from the windows and close the shutters. It took all of a minute, and then I ran down to join my kids who were losing it because they thought something happened to me. They didn't understand what's going on. The whole thing was scary. Suddenly there's these big sounds. The adults are screaming and crying, and mom disappears.
Right.
And a few weeks later, or I should say that they attacked me. They're like, why did you leave us? And I told them, this is what we do. When something happens, when something bad happens, we take care of each other. We help each other. We don't just think of ourselves. And I stand behind it. At the same time, it was very painful to know that I scared them like this. And a few weeks later, when I asked my 6-year-old, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? What is hard for you? What is good for you? Trying to help him find words to process. He said, the worst thing for me was when I went to the bomb shelter and you weren't there because I thought you were dead.
Mm.
It was awful to feel that I traumatized my 6-year-old child. And yet, I look at them now, almost 2 years later, and they're fine. They're more than fine. They live their life fully, they create, they form connections. They developed so much stamina for dealing with reality that the Iran war unfazed, they just were unfazed by it in a way that's eerie. And it's sad. It's sad that we're raising children in a reality where they get used to the abnormal, but at the same time, their resilience, their ability to live a life of immediacy, like you said, but that also means finding the joy in the immediate environment and the purpose and the fun and the friendships. It helps me when I just can't take it anymore.
Yeah. You shut down. Um, yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a lot of writing, maybe not enough, analyzing, Generation Z. The thoughts that people are, that adolescents and older adolescents are being raised to be self-absorbed and think only about themselves. And then you have this generation of lions in Israel, of young people who came home and stood up and, in your mother's example, of soldiering on, they were the actual soldiers. They are the actual soldiers. And when you think of the next great tasks that the soldiers are going to do when this war is over, please God, is, builds a better society, because they know what happens when you don't have a society that's coherent, and when you're and what it means to live when you're not safe. You wrote a column called "Because I'm Jewish," where you really, because we're Jews, I should say, and you asked, why are we here in the first place? Why do our brothers and sisters in other countries care about us? Why do we care about them? And your answer kept being, because we're Jews. And then you wrote, when I look around, I see so many people, Jews and non-Jews, transmuting the passive suffering of our covenant of fate into the glowing strength of our shared purpose, our shared covenant of destiny. And in this shared commitment, I find hope. Um, so many months later, you Do you still feel that same sense of hope? Does that still ring true for you?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. The longer answer is that it's more complicated because I think in those first few weeks after October 7th,
So much
things
unity,
were
right?
clear. Things were very clear. It was like we stripped all the pretense, all the illusions, all the unimportant chatter. We stripped all of that away. And what was left were the basic truths. And they're still the basic truth. And it's one of those things, I think Blue Greenberg said that once you eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, you can't uneat it, right? Once you see the basic truth with all their simplicity, you can't unsee it, and it's still true. It's, of course, much more complicated because now that enough time has passed, we do have space to remember all the places we disagree with each other, all the places we have very contradictory, really, not just different, contradictory visions for what the future of Israel or the Jewish people more generally should be. And this requires careful thought because it means that just saying because we are Jewish, we share something. Yeah, and also because we are Jewish, we disagree about what this shared something is and where it should go. So it requires us to think and to make space for one another and to work through our disagreements. But while all of this is happening, and I do believe that it can and should and is happening, it's not just fights all the time. We are clarifying things, we're working through things, we're building something by learning how to listen to one another and how to speak with one another. The basic framework is still the same, that we carry the same journey. We are the newest generation, the latest generation of a very, very old tale. And we're walking the path that our forefathers started. And we're passing it on. Like Rabbi Sacks said, we're writing our letter in the book because we're Jewish.
Yeah, I mean, he did so much work in his lifetime on Jewish identity, and I think that that work is getting, first of all, translated broadly in Hebrew, and even taken to the front lines so that people understand when what am I fighting for? What is it that I'm fighting for? Let's go back to writing. Thoughts on the writing process.
That's a very general question.
Take it wherever you want.
For me personally, writing is being home. I write every day, and when I write, I am home because it means that I'm allowing, like I said, that undefinable, raw, large place inside ourselves and everything around me. I'm allowing it to become concrete and have texture and become something I can look at and deal with and reshape. And it gives me a certain mastery over my reality. And it's like being at home when things are familiar and you know where the fridge is and you know what you have in it and what you need to buy for it and you know which chair you want to sit in when the light comes in from this window or from that window. So when I write, I feel at home. The writing process changes when you try and tie it to a project. Once you have a goal or a purpose that's beyond just being in it, it brings rewards like any purpose because it infuses our days with intention and it infuses what we do with meaning that goes beyond the moment, that projects us into the future in some larger way. But at the same time, it has stresses and pressures and tensions and failures and shortcomings like any other work that we do with the hope to build something. But since we're talking here not just about writing generally, we're talking about writing at war and when pain is so heavy on our heart, I want to say that I found personally that the writing process and writing about the war or about my experiences in the war has been not healing precisely, but it helped me pave a way from raw pain to love, to meaning, to connection, because by giving my pain language, I allowed other people to be there with me. And the second other people are there with you, you're not alone. And the second you're not alone, you remember that the reason you're in pain is that you love. Those of us who were not physically, personally affected, why are we in pain? We're in pain because we love. The measure of our pain is a measure of our love. And love is a good thing. Love is a good thing. And once you translate pain into love through words, you can live with it. You can accept it. You can't accept the loss, but you can accept your own pain.
It's very profound, really very profound. You mentioned home and the details that make you know, oh, I'm in this place that's familiar. We last spent time in person together at a writer's retreat, and then you couldn't get home. You were, I think, 10 minutes from home, and then you got derailed, rerouted to Cyprus, where you spent a number of days. We even FaceTimed there. And and you wrote a column about it. Why did you write a column, Dafka, about being in Cyprus for a few days, being stuck there?
I wanted people to know how powerful our people are when we face trouble together. It was really just a sense of I wanted to give an account to the word because the experience was astounding. You know, you go into an airplane with a bunch of other Israelis, forgive me for denigrating my own people, but you know, there's pushing and shoving and people being rude to one another. And you're like, oh yeah, it feels like home. El Al always says, "Achi b'bayit ba'olam," you're, you know, most at home wherever you are. I'm like, oh yeah, I feel it. I feel
Yeah.
it. Um, and then we're already on our way down in the descent. We started the descent. Everybody's eyeing their surrounding, trying to make sure they picked up all their stuff. And suddenly the announcement goes up and says, we're due to a security situation, we're routed to Cyprus. Please don't ask us. We don't know what's going on either. We'll let you know as soon as we know. And something amazing happened. Within the space of 1 second, an airplane full of strangers who maybe bother each other, who maybe pushed or passed each other or cut each other in line, has become a family. Everybody was helping one another. Everybody was reaching out to one another. People were comforting each other, holding each other's babies, using hotspots on their phone to enable half the plane, in the case of one very nice young American woman, to call their loved ones by signing into the internet, just helping each other book hotels in Cyprus. And that wave of love, of support, of stepping up to the moment and caring for one another kept surrounding me in Cyprus. It wasn't over once we got off the plane. It seemed like everybody in that city was Israeli at some point in Larnaca. At first it was like you would walk down the street and every now and then you would see a group of Israelis and people would ask you, are you okay? Do you need a charger? Do you have a place to stay? And I would ask them, do you need help figuring out the apps to order a hotel, et cetera, et cetera. And at some point, after a few days, when more and more Israelis kept coming, you would go and every now and then you would meet a non-Israeli. That was the feeling. But everybody was kind. Everybody was loving. Everybody went out of their way to help each other. Now, I wanted to share that. I thought that was something that people should know about, that this is who we are. It's so easy to forget it when we disagree and fight and yell, but this is who we are. And it was really important for me to bear witness to that.
Okay, beautiful. We've had a request, and I made a request of you also to read a poem from Az Nashir. I mean, it's incredible. You not only co-edited one volume of poetry, but two volumes of poetry during this period of time to really, again, give language to what we're experiencing. So I'd like to ask you, and first of all, anyone who's listening, if you have a question, you want to pop it in the chat. For Rachel, please share some words with us.
I do want to say first, before I read it, I just want to say one word about Az Nashir. Az Nashir is the brainchild of my friend, my colleague, Shira Lankin-Sheps, who's an amazing writer in her own right and a leader in many, many ways. And she had it in what she calls a divine download, an idea that just came full form to her on Shvi'i Shel Pesach last year, the first Pesach of the war. And she called me and our friend, Banit and Gordon, and we immediately signed up for it. And the reason for me, the reason I wanted to participate in creating this anthology where many, many women shared prayers written after October 7th, was that since the beginning of the war, I felt like what I have to offer, what my, using my mother's metaphor, the line I have to defend as a soldier in this war, it's not fighting and it's not healing and it's not being a psychologist because I can't. I'm not any of those things. It's offering hope and strength as a teacher, as a writer, as a poet, as you said. And the shortcoming of that role, or the place where I felt like I was confined in this role, is that all I could do is offer people my ideas, my words, the things that make me feel hopeful or empowered. But what I wanted was to help them find their words, help them find what makes them feel stronger and share that. And Shira's vision for Az Nashir was inviting other women to write. And by creating a varied anthology of voices, inviting the readers to discover what works for them. And I felt like that was the right next step. So I just wanted to say that. And
Thank Shira and thank Anne for their contributions to this project.
And with that in mind, I want to read one prayer, which was the first prayer I wrote. And it's a prayer that's very simple. It's not very, high poetry. It's not no stanzas, no nothing. But it's an intention. And it's the one intention that's been keeping me sane from that moment on the stairwell when I saw my daughter's white face and realized what my role is in that moment and that's what I have to focus on. And I called it a prayer for focus. My God, on the days in which I am tempted to gaze round with weary eyes and I allow my heart to fill with fear, help me to look at my loved ones and recall what is in my hands to control, to encourage, to support, to embrace, to listen, to sow small seeds of encouragement and beating hearts. That's all. This is what is in my hands to do. Help me to plant what I am meant to plant and leave all that remains in your hands.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Did it help you? Has it helped you maintain a focus?
Yes, yes. I had that intention in my heart before I wrote the prayer. Like I said, from that moment on the stairwell, I realized that the only way to keep my sanity is to worry about the things that are in my control and let go of everything else. And that's what I've been trying to do. But writing it down in a way that now I can repeat it to myself and focus on it has been very healing and hopeful for me.
Rachel, you inaugurated this 3-part series. Next week, my colleague here, Elise Abrams-Conan, will be in conversation with Oren Cohen, who's an IDF photographer who's been photographing the war, so poetry lens, the photography lens, and then Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman will be in conversation with Ricky Bernstein, who's a social worker who's been working in particular with the victims of Kibbutz Be'eri, with the survivors of Kibbutz Be'eri, as they manage their trauma, among other clients that she's worked with. So trying to think about healing and healing in all different forms and different forms of capturing the war. And those dates are in your chat. I just wanted to end with something that you wrote, a prayer for Simchat Torah, where you say to God, my feet are heavy today. I want to rejoice, but my heart is grieving for the beloved and cherished who were never parted in life or in death. And I want to thank you for helping us give language to what's heavy and helping us rejoice. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope this is the beginning of a very meaningful 3 weeks where we're able to grieve. And on the other side of grieving, we're able to redeem. Thank you.
Thank you. May we carry, we carry the broken luchot, the broken tablets and the whole tablets. May we carry our brokenness and our wholeness, our connection, our strength together at the same time. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to reflect on that.
Amen. Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us.